The fastest way to lose an avoidant is to want them too much. This is the truth most people don't want to hear because it directly contradicts everything we've been taught about love. With an avoidant, wanting them harder does not create closeness, it triggers distance. The moment desire turns into pursuit, their nervous system reads it as pressure, not because you did something wrong, but because closeness has historically meant obligation, loss of autonomy, or emotional overwhelm for them. So when you lean in, they instinctively lean out. This isn't cruelty, it's conditioning. Avoidants don't bond through pursuit. They bond through contrast, through the difference between someone who needs them to stay and someone who is emotionally complete, whether they stay or go. When you chase, you flatten that contrast, you become predictable, available, emotionally open, on demand, and predictability feels safe. But it does not create attachment for someone wired to associate safety with distance. The paradox is this: the more you try to secure the connection, the more the connection dissolves. Every explanation, every reassurance request, every "I just want to understand where this is going" conversation tells their nervous system one thing: you want more than they can give right now. And instead of rising to meet you, they retreat to protect themselves from the expectation. Real attachment doesn't begin when you do more. It begins when you stop over-functioning emotionally. When you stop proving that you're patient, understanding, low maintenance, or different from everyone else who wanted more. The moment you stop explaining your worth and stop managing their comfort, their nervous system finally has space to notice you. Not as pressure, but as presence. What actually creates attachment in an avoidant is not intensity. It's absence paired with safety. Absence without drama. Distance without punishment. Silence without emotional collapse. When you don't chase their withdrawal, something unfamiliar happens inside them. There is no relief, no sense of good, I escaped. Instead, there's a quiet disruption, a missing signal, a loss they didn't expect to feel. Because here's what most people misunderstand: avoidants don't fear intimacy as much as they fear dependence. They fear being needed in a way that traps them. So when you remain grounded, regulated, and self-directed, even as you step back, you violate their internal rulebook. You show them closeness doesn't require self-erasure, and distance doesn't come with chaos. They don't miss people who cling. Clinging confirms their belief that relationships cost too much, that someone will eventually need more than they can give. But they do miss people who leave without collapsing. People who don't beg, don't spiral, don't threaten, don't try to fix the connection on the way out. That kind of exit creates a question mark instead of relief. And that question mark lingers because when you don't chase, they're forced to confront something they've avoided their entire life. Was that actually important to them? Not because you demanded it, but because you walked away intact. Your calm absence becomes louder than any emotional speech you could have given. This is the paradox avoidants can't escape. The very thing they believe will bring them freedom, distance, is what reveals the attachment they didn't know they were forming. Not because you manipulated them, not because you withheld love, but because you stopped abandoning yourself in an attempt to be chosen. And in that space where you are no longer pursuing, no longer explaining, no longer overgiving, attachment finally has room to emerge. Avoidants don't attach to need, they attach to stability. This is where most people get it backwards. They assume love is proven through emotional openness, reassurance seeking, and constant connection. But for an avoidant, those behaviors don't feel like love. They feel like pressure, not because you're asking for too much, but because they grew up learning that closeness came with expectations they couldn't meet or emotions they weren't equipped to handle. So their nervous system learned to stay safe by staying independent. That's why emotional self-containment is so powerful. When you regulate yourself instead of reacting, you become unfamiliar in the most magnetic way. You don't mirror their withdrawal with panic. You don't chase them down with questions. You don't try to pull them closer when they pull away. And that absence of reaction disrupts the pattern they expect. Avoidants are used to one of two dynamics. Either someone overfunctions emotionally and demands closeness, or someone shuts down and disengages completely. What they are not used to is someone who remains present, grounded, and whole, without leaning on them for emotional regulation. That kind of stability doesn't trigger their defenses. It quietly disarms them. When don't ask for reassurance, you remove the sense of obligation they fear. Reassurance requests to an avoidant nervous system translate into, I need you to manage my emotions, and that immediately activates withdrawal. But when you soothe yourself, when you trust your own worth without needing it reflected back to you in real time, something shifts. You no longer feel like a responsibility. You feel like a choice. When you don't chase clarity, you signal emotional confidence. Avoidants often keep relationships ambiguous because clarity feels like commitment and commitment feels like a loss of freedom. The more someone pushes for definition, the more the avoidant delays. But when you don't demand timelines or labels, not because you're afraid to want them, but because you're secure enough to walk away if they don't align, you remove the power struggle entirely. And when you don't spiral, when they pull back, that's where the real impact happens. Avoidants expect distance to create relief. They expect the space to calm their system. But when you stay regulated, when you don't flood them with emotion or disappear in resentment, the distance doesn't resolve anything. Instead of relief, they feel something unfamiliar, curiosity, awareness, sometimes even anxiety. Not because you did anything wrong, but because the usual emotional script didn't play out. Your calm becomes confronting. Because calm signals something their system has rarely experienced: closeness without chaos, connection without obligation, presence without pressure. And for someone who learned early on that emotions were overwhelming or unsafe, that kind of stability is deeply disarming. This is why emotional self-containment creates attachment where emotional intensity fails. You are no longer trying to be chosen. You are simply showing up as someone who knows how to hold themselves, someone who doesn't collapse when things feel uncertain, someone who doesn't outsource their emotional safety to another person. And that independence does something profound. It allows the avoidant to approach you without feeling trapped, to want you without feeling responsible for you, to miss you without feeling guilty for needing space. The calm you carry, that's not indifference. It's self-trust. And self-trust reads as safety to a nervous system that has always equated closeness with threat. They may not name it. They may not even understand it. But over time, that regulated presence becomes the one place their system doesn't feel the need to escape. And that's where real attachment begins. Not in need, not in pursuit, but in emotional stability that quietly says, I want you, but I don't need you to be okay. If access to you is unlimited, attachment never forms. This is one of the hardest shifts to make because it feels counterintuitive and at first uncomfortable. We're taught that love means availability, being there, responding quickly, making yourself easy to reach. But with an avoidant, unlimited access doesn't create closeness. It creates complacency. When you are always available, always responsive, always emotionally open, there is no contrast, no urgency, no reason for their nervous system to orient toward you. Avoidants bond when effort is required, but not demanded. That distinction matters. The moment effort turns into pressure, they shut down. But when effort becomes a natural consequence of your full, engaged life, something shifts. Like they don't feel forced to show up. They feel invited to. You don't disappear dramatically. You don't play games. You don't announce that you're pulling back or threaten to leave in order to provoke a reaction. Those behaviors still center them and keep you emotionally entangled. Instead, you simply stop making yourself constantly available. You answer when you're genuinely present. You initiate when it feels aligned, not when you're anxious. You let conversations end without forcing continuation. This isn't punishment. It's self-respect. When access to you is limited in a calm, grounded way, their nervous system has to work a little harder to feel you. And effort is what creates meaning. Humans attach to what they invest in. Avoidants are no different. They just resist being asked to invest. But when the environment quietly requires it without emotional demand, they engage without feeling trapped. Consistency without over-access is where the psychological tension forms. You're still warm, still kind, still emotionally safe, but you're not always there on cue. And that unpredictability, when paired with emotional steadiness, creates a loop their mind can't close. They start to notice when you're not available. They replay interactions. They feel the absence more sharply because it isn't chaotic or hostile. It's neutral, and neutrality leaves space for projection. This is where fixation begins. Because avoidants expect distance to reduce connection. They expect space to quiet emotion. But when your absence isn't dramatic, it doesn't give them relief. It gives them awareness. They become aware of the role you played, the energy you brought, the emotional stability they felt around you. And now that it's not immediately accessible, their system starts to reach for it. Unlimited access removes the opportunity for longing. It tells their nervous system there's no risk in disengaging because you'll still be there. But when access is earned through presence and mutual effort, they begin to associate connection with value rather than obligation. This doesn't mean becoming cold or withholding affection. It means letting your availability reflect your self-worth instead of your anxiety. You don't drop everything to respond. You don't rearrange your life to stay connected. You allow your time, energy, and attention to be something that's shared, not given away freely in the hope it will secure closeness. And the irony is this: the less you try to hold the connection together, the more they feel it. Because now connection requires participation, and participation is what creates attachment. That unresolved tension, the sense that they could lose access to you, not because you're leaving, but because you're living, becomes magnetic. They don't feel chased. They don't feel pressured. They feel drawn. And over time, that draw turns into fixation. Not because you made yourself scarce, but because you made yourself valuable. When clear boundary does more than 1,000 emotional talks, this is where most people lose their power with an avoidant. Not because they ask for too much, but because they ask for it over and over again. They explain, rephrase, soften, and justify their needs, hoping that clarity will finally create movement. But with an avoidant, repeated emotional conversations don't create understanding. They create relief. Relief that you're still there, still trying, still willing to accommodate their limits. Avoidants don't process emotion in conversation. They process it after the connection is gone. In the moment, emotional dialogue activates their defenses. They intellectualize, they minimize, they reassure just enough to stabilize the situation. And once things calm down, nothing changes. Not because they don't care, but because their nervous system is focused on escaping pressure, not integrating emotion. That's why speaking truth once is so powerful. You say what you need calmly, cleanly, and without blame. No accusations, no emotional flooding, no long explanations meant to make them understand your pain. You simply state your boundary and your standard. This is what I need. This is what doesn't work for me. This is what I'm willing to participate in. And then you stop negotiating your worth. The moment you repeat yourself, you shift from self-respect into self-justification. And self-justification teaches an avoidant that your needs are flexible, optional, and ultimately negotiable. It tells them they can stay exactly where they are while you carry the emotional load of the relationship. Silence after truth does something conversation never can. It removes the safety net. When there's no immediate emotional reassurance, no follow-up explanation, no softening of the boundary, the avoidant is left alone with the information. And that's where processing actually begins. Because distance is the environment where avoidants feel not closeness, not dialogue. Distant explaining only creates comfort. It comforts them because it keeps you engaged. It reassures them that the connection is still intact, that there's no real consequence to staying emotionally unavailable. But when you speak once and then remove yourself, not angrily, not dramatically, just firmly, the nervous system can't bypass the reality anymore. Your absence becomes the message. This doesn't mean ghosting. It doesn't mean disappearing without a word. It means allowing your actions to align with your truth. If you say you need consistency and they can't offer it, you don't stay to debate whether your need is reasonable. You step back. If you say you want emotional presence and they continue to be distant, you don't keep asking them to change. You let the connection feel the consequence of their capacity. And that consequence isn't punishment, it's clarity. Avoidants often rely on emotional ambiguity to stay comfortable. As long as things are talked about but not acted on, they don't have to confront their limitations. But when your words are followed by self-respecting distance, ambiguity collapses. They're forced to feel the loss of access, the shift in energy, the absence of emotional availability they once took for granted. That's when reflection happens. Not because you convinced them, but because you stopped cushioning them from the truth. One clear boundary, followed by congruent action, creates more impact than endless emotional labor ever could. It tells them you mean what you say, that your needs are not hypothetical. That connection with you requires presence, not promises. And whether they rise to meet that truth or not, you reclaim something essential in the process: your self-respect. You stop arguing for your worth. You stop explaining your needs. You let the truth stand on its own. And in that space where words end and action begins, real clarity finally arrives. Distance isn't manipulation, it's the mirror.
Most people misunderstand distance. They think stepping back has to be dramatic, cold, or strategic to have impact. But with an avoidant, punishment only confirms their deepest fear: that closeness comes with emotional consequences. Guilt, accusations, and emotional withdrawal, framed as retaliation, don't create reflection. They create justification. They tell the avoidant they were right to keep their distance in the first place.
That's why the most powerful absence is a clean one. You don't punish, you don't guilt, you don't make passive-aggressive comments or suddenly turn cold. You don't announce that you're pulling back or explain why they're about to feel your absence. All of that keeps you emotionally tethered to their response. It keeps the focus on whether they notice, whether they care, whether they react. Instead, you simply redirect your energy back to your life. You invest where you feel reciprocity. You put attention into your routines, your work, your friendships, your body, your future. Not to prove a point, but because your energy was never meant to be spent sustaining a one-sided connection. When you stop propping the dynamic up, something very important happens. The relationship reveals its true weight. Avoidants often don't realize how much emotional labor someone else is carrying until it's gone. While you were present, patient, and emotionally available, the connection felt effortless to them. Not because it was easy, but because you were doing the stabilizing. When you remove that effort quietly, the absence is felt not as abandonment, but as disruption. This is where the mirror appears. They start to notice the silence, the lack of initiation, the missing emotional warmth. And because there's no blame attached, no emotional outburst to deflect onto, they're left alone with the experience. They can't rationalize it as drama. They can't dismiss it as manipulation. All they can feel is the difference. And that difference forces awareness. This is where avoidants attach. Not when you beg them to stay, but when they realize the connection existed because you sustained it, and now it doesn't. They begin to see the cost of emotional distance, not in theory, but in real time. They feel what it's like when someone stops bridging the gap for them. Your absence doesn't say, "You hurt me." It says, "I chose myself." And that message lands far deeper. Because when distance is calm, regulated, and non-punitive, it doesn't activate their defenses. It activates curiosity. They start to wonder what changed, why you're no longer orbiting their availability, why the connection feels thinner, quieter, less alive. That curiosity is the beginning of attachment. Not because you withdrew love, but because you withdrew overgiving. You didn't disappear. You didn't close your heart. You simply stopped pouring energy into a space that couldn't hold it. And whether they step forward or not, something important happens for you. You stop waiting to be felt. You stop hoping distance will make them choose you. You let it do what it's meant to do. Reveal the truth. Distance isn't a tactic. It's information. And when it's used without punishment, it reflects the dynamic back to them with brutal clarity and returns your power to where it belongs. Over-accommodation kills attraction faster than conflict ever could. This is one of the most subtle traps people fall into with avoidance. Because it looks like love, you tell yourself you're being patient, compassionate, emotionally intelligent. You explain away their distance. You soften your needs. You wait longer than feels natural. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to disappear inside the connection. Yes, their fear is real. Avoidants genuinely experience closeness as threatening when their nervous system hasn't learned safety and intimacy. Their withdrawal isn't a performance, it's protection. But understanding their fear does not mean sacrificing yourself to soothe it. And this is where the line gets crossed. The moment you start shrinking your needs to keep the peace, attraction begins to erode. Over-accommodation teaches an avoidant something very specific: that they don't have to grow. That emotional absence will be met with patience instead of consequence. That the relationship can continue as long as you are willing to carry the weight alone. And while that may feel safe to them, it does not create attachment. It creates comfort. And comfort without mutual investment leads to indifference. When you constantly validate their distance. I know you're busy. I know this is hard for you. I understand why you need space, without also validating your own needs. You reinforce the imbalance. You become the emotionally flexible one, the one who adapts, the one who stays regulated so they don't have to. And over time, that dynamic strips the relationship of polarity. Avoidants don't attach to people who abandon themselves. They attach to people who remain whole. The shift happens the moment you stop over-validating emotional absence and start honoring your own internal signals. That doesn't mean becoming harsh or unempathetic. It means allowing your needs to exist without apology. It means saying, I understand this is difficult for you, and this is still what I need to feel connected. And then allowing their response or lack of one to inform your next step. This is where you move from safe to significant. Safe is predictable. Safe bends. Safe waits. Safe absorbs disappointment quietly. But significant has edges. Significant has standards. Significant doesn't threaten or demand. It simply does not participate in dynamics that require self-erasure. Conflict, when handled calmly, is far less damaging to attraction than silent self-abandonment. Avoidance can tolerate disagreement. What they don't respond to is someone who disappears internally to keep them comfortable. That dynamic doesn't challenge their capacity, it confirms their avoidance. When you stop over-accommodating, something important happens. The emotional labor returns to the person it belongs to. They are faced with a choice: expand to meet you, or lose access to the version of you that made the connection feel alive. And that moment is uncomfortable for them, but necessary, because attachment only forms when there is something at stake. When your presence is not guaranteed. When being with you requires showing up emotionally, not just enjoying the benefits of your patience. This doesn't mean becoming rigid or emotionally closed. It means becoming congruent. Your words match your actions. Your empathy includes yourself. Your understanding does not override your self-respect. And whether they rise or retreat, you win something essential. You stop contorting yourself to be lovable. You stop proving you're easy to be with. You allow the relationship to either deepen through mutual effort or end through most limitation. Avoidants don't attach to people who abandon themselves because there's nothing left to attach to. But when you remain anchored in your needs, grounded in your worth, and unwilling to shrink, you become undeniable. Not because you demanded love, but because you refused to disappear to earn it. Closure comforts them. Unfinished loss attaches them. This goes against everything we're taught about healing. We're told closure is healthy, mature, necessary, that talking it through one last time will bring peace. But with an avoidant, closure doesn't create understanding, it creates relief. It gives them a clean ending, a logical explanation they can file away and use to emotionally detach without ever feeling the full weight of the loss. Avoidants detach by intellectualizing. When emotions get too intense, they move into their head. They analyze, rationalize, and narrate the situation in a way that minimizes emotional impact. Closure feeds this process perfectly. It gives them language, reason, a story that allows them to say, this makes sense, instead of, this hurts. That's why closure gives them a clean exit. When you stay to explain how much you cared, why it mattered, how they hurt you, and what you hoped could have been different, you're not creating intimacy. You're helping them regulate. You're making it easier for them to let go without ever having to sit in the discomfort of what they lost. Walking away without closure isn't cruelty, it's restraint. When you leave calmly, without drama, without begging, without ultimatums or final speeches, you interrupt their ability to rationalize the ending. There's no neat explanation to hold on to, no emotional processing done in real time. Just a quiet absence where something meaningful used to be. And that absence creates an emotional loop they can't close. They replay conversations. They wonder what you felt. They question whether they misjudged the depth of the connection. Without closure, the mind keeps returning to the unresolved. And because avoidants are used to being the ones who pull away, experiencing someone leave without emotional collapse disrupts their sense of control. This isn't about manipulation. It's about allowing the truth to land without cushioning it. Closure often serves the person least willing to change. It lets them walk away feeling understood, forgiven, or justified. But when you don't offer it, you stop protecting them from the emotional consequences of their limitations. The unfinished loss forces reflection in a way conversation never could. Because now, instead of remembering your words, they feel your absence. Instead of analyzing your explanation, they experience the shift in energy. And without a final emotional exchange to neutralize the impact, the loss stays alive in their nervous system. That's where attachment forms, not in clarity, but in contrast. And yes, that loop can turn into obsession. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, persistent awareness that something valuable slipped away, unresolved, that you didn't chase, you didn't beg, you didn't try to convince them of your worth. You simply removed yourself from a dynamic that couldn't meet you. Walking away without closure also does something important for you. It breaks the habit of seeking validation from someone emotionally unavailable. It stops you from hoping one more conversation will finally make them understand. It allows you to grieve without reopening the phone. You don't need to be fully understood to be free. And if they one day reach back out, it won't be because of what you said in your final moment together. It will be because of what they felt when you were no longer there to soften the loss. Closure comforts them. Unfinished loss changes them. And either way, you reclaim your power by refusing to explain your worth on the way out. If they attach after you leave, it doesn't mean you should return. This is one of the most painful moments in any avoidant dynamic, when they finally realize what you meant to them, but only after you've stepped away. Suddenly, there's emotion, regret, awareness, sometimes even a confession of feelings they couldn't access while you were present. And it's tempting to see this as proof that everything you invested wasn't wasted. But delayed attachment is not the same as emotional capacity. Avoidants often realize love after loss because distance lowers the threat level. When you're no longer asking for presence, consistency, or vulnerability, their nervous system relaxes enough to feel the fear that blocked connection disappears. An emotion rushes in. That doesn't mean they've learned how to sustain intimacy. It means the pressure is gone. Love felt in safety is not the same as love lived in relationship. This is where many people make the mistake of waiting. They pause their healing. They stay emotionally available just in case. They interpret late attachment as growth, but awareness without action doesn't change patterns. Insight without practice doesn't build capacity, and attachment without growth still ends in abandonment, just slower. Because once you return, the old triggers reappear, expectations come back, emotional demands resurface, and without real internal work, the avoidance nervous system will default to what it knows: withdrawal, distance, and emotional minimization. Waiting for them to catch up keeps you stuck in hope instead of reality. Your power was never in making them choose you. You already did everything you could to show up. You communicated, you regulated, you stayed longer than you should have. If they couldn't meet you, then waiting doesn't raise their capacity. It only lowers your standards. Choosing yourself first is not bitterness. It's discernment. It means recognizing the difference between someone missing you and someone being able to love you well. It means understanding that regret doesn't equal readiness. And it means refusing to re-enter a dynamic where your needs were consistently delayed in favor of their comfort. This doesn't mean people can't grow. They can, but growth is measured by consistent behavior, not emotional declarations made in the safety of your absence. If change only appears when there's no relationship to maintain, it isn't tame, it's relief. And the hardest truth is this: sometimes you were the catalyst, not the destination. Your presence exposed what they couldn't access. Your absence forced awareness. But that doesn't obligate you to return and carry them through their growth. You don't owe anyone access to you just because they finally realized your value. Your work is not to wait. It's to move forward aligned with your needs, your boundaries, and your capacity for real connection. If they meet you there one day, consistently, grounded, and emotionally available, that's information. But until then, hope is not a plan. Your power isn't in being chosen after loss. It's in choosing yourself before you're abandoned again. And that choice is what finally breaks the cycle. They don't forget everyone else because you try harder. They forget because you stop chasing. This is the moment where most people finally understand the avoidant paradox. Attachment doesn't come from effort, intensity, or emotional labor. It comes from presence, paired with self-respect. The harder you push, the more they pull away. The more you chase, explain, or plead, the safer they feel in keeping distance. But when you stop pursuing, not out of spite, not out of drama, but out of alignment with your own needs, something shifts that no amount of words or reassurances can replicate. Avoidants attach when you are calm without them, when their withdrawal or silence doesn't destabilize your emotions. You become something they've rarely experienced: regulated, grounded, unshakable. That calm is magnetic because it disrupts their nervous system. They are wired to expect chaos or over-reliance in relationships. Calmness isn't passive. It is the presence of someone whole, a person whose stability doesn't require them to change instantly or manage your emotions. They attach when you are honest without pleading. Honesty that isn't diluted by fear or desperation is rare. Avoidants are accustomed to explanations that can be negotiated, boundaries that can be bent, or emotional appeals that can be argued with. When you express your truth clearly, firmly, and without begging for validation, you force them to see your value and your limits. You are not demanding attachment. You are showing what connection with you actually requires. They attach when you are present without pursuing. You show up fully without clinging, without demanding reciprocation, without attempting to engineer the outcome. Presence without pursuit creates contrast. They see you, but they also see a life that doesn't revolve entirely around them. That combination, access plus autonomy, is magnetic because it allows them to want without feeling trapped, to engage without fearing loss, and to consider attachment without the pressure of obligation. They attach when you are willing to walk without resentment, walking away calmly without guilt, without anger, without lingering emotional hooks, signals something profound. Your love is self-contained. Your connection is not a tool to extract change, nor is it a measure of your worth. That freedom is both unsettling and magnetic to someone wired to fear dependence, because it shows them the possibility of closeness that isn't entangled with desperation or need. That combination is rare: calmness, honesty, presence, and self-contained walking away. It is almost unheard of in the dynamics avoidants are used to, and rarity creates attachment. It's not about clever strategies or emotional manipulation. It's about refusing to abandon yourself in an attempt to secure someone else's attachment. They don't forget everyone else because you tried harder. They forget because you stopped. You stopped chasing. You stopped sacrificing your boundaries. You stopped bending yourself into what they could tolerate. And in doing so, you became magnetic, not because you changed them, but because you honored yourself. Attachment forms not through persuasion, but through integrity, not through need, but through self-respect. And that is the closing truth. Avoidance can't ignore.